Greetings, retro lover. This is Ethan, aka the Ghost Mall, coming to you once again from my home studio. And in this video, what I thought I would do for you today is to offer you a kind of breakdown of a chord progression that I am writing for a song that's currently in the works here at the Ghost Mall. I got a lot of great feedback on a previous video I made called Retro Chords. And what that video is, it's kind of actually a lengthy music theory kind of a lesson. But what I tried to do in that video was to introduce whoever was watching to the basics of building chords and to adding extensions to the chords in your songs to make them a little more interesting and a little more lively. And in particular, how to borrow chord voicings and chord extensions typically used in jazz and R&B music to give your retrowave songs, if that's something you write, retro inspired music, a more authentic kind of a bent to them. And that video has been the most popular video I've made so far, which has really been cool to see. I'm really pleased to know that it has been of use to so many folks. And if you watched that, thank you so much for giving it a look and for all the positive feedback I've gotten. I really appreciate it. And if you haven't seen it yet, and it sounds like something that might help you, I'll be happy to link it up in the description of this video. But at any rate, what I wanted to do in today's video is to kind of take that a step further and show you a song that I'm currently working on and break down in detail the chord progressions in the song and how I came to add the chords that I did and use the extensions that I did and sort of talk about voice leading and diatonic versus non-diatonic chords and the like, in the hopes that that might take the concepts from the other retro chords video a little bit further. So let's go ahead and get started. So the song that I've pulled up here today is really it's just a work in progress. I try to do every once in a while what I call a 90-minute challenge, in which I sit down and in an hour and a half, and it doesn't have to be a 90-minute challenge, it could be 2 hours or 3 hours, but set yourself some kind of time limit is the recommendation. And I try to go from nothing, just a blank slate here in my DAW, to a fully realized, at least framework for a song in 90 minutes. And so this was the result of one of my 90-minute challenges, and I managed to get, as you can see, it laid out here from beginning to end with verse, pre-chorus, chorus, have a bridge and an intro, and all of those good things with unique chord progressions in each section, and just the basics of arrangement here. This is a kind of late 70s, maybe early 80s soul kind of a song. I had been listening to a lot of Bobby Caldwell, if any of you know who he is. Just really inspiring soul kind of songwriter and singer from the late 70s, along with a lot of Stevie Wonder, and this is what came out. So what I'm going to do for you now is I will play you back just the beginning sections, because there are really 4 distinct chord progressions in this song. We got an intro, a verse, a pre-chorus, and a chorus, and then from there on they repeat throughout the song. But I want to introduce you to the chord progressions, and then I'm going to go through and break them all down individually in detail and look at the chords themselves and whatnot. But let me just play you back the first segment of the song so you get a feel for what it sounds like. Here goes. All right, so there you have it, and it just proceeds on from there. We loop back to the verse progression and continue to the end of the song. But yeah, as you can tell, a really kind of funky, late 70s soul kind of a vibe going on there with a lot of jazz chords, and I'm going to break them down in detail for you here. Let me just start by letting you know that, so this was written in the key of C major, but what you heard is actually sounding up 2 half steps, just because as I was kind of beginning to tinker with vocal melody ideas, which I haven't finished yet, I decided it might be easier to do raised up. But so you heard it like this. But really it was written down here in the key of C major. And so I'm going to go ahead and break it down for you in the key of C major. Also, it's going to be easier for me to explain some of the diatonic and non-diatonic chords in this progression relative to C major, because all of the diatonic notes in C major are the white keys, which we sort of covered in the previous Retro Chords video. So I have my good friend MIDI chord analyzer open again here, which I introduced in that Retro Chords video. I'll be sure to put a link into the description of this video as well if you want to download it as a plugin, because it's free. And again, what it does is it really is useful to help you see if you're playing a chord. It's going to tell you exactly what it is live while you play it. It analyzes it and tells you exactly what you're playing, even simple intervals up to full, chords. So we have that open here. You should be seeing my keyboard. In the bottom right, you should be seeing me playing, and then you can also go ahead and see here on the screen, I have another keyboard so you can see the notes I'm playing. Hopefully all of these things combined will be enough for you to sort of follow along with me as I break this down for you. Okay, so as I said, this song is composed really of 4 separate chord progressions: an intro, a verse, which is sort of a variation on the intro, pre-chorus, and a chorus. So let's just start with the beginning one, and it begins like this. So that's what plays in the intro. There's no bass, there's no left hand playing, or the bass hasn't entered yet. And these are all diatonic chords. Now, what does that mean? Diatonic simply means they are sort of native or natural to the key that the song is written in. So this key, the song rather, was written in the key of C major before I transposed it. And the notes that are diatonic to C major, as I said, are all the white keys. No sharps or flats. And this chord progression stays within, this intro chord progression stays within the key. So let's look at what we have here. Again, as I mentioned in the Retro Chords introductory video, once you go beyond simple triads, major, minor, augmented, and diminished, and start adding additional notes, you are starting to go into the realm of extensions like 7th chords and 9th chords. And that's where you get more complicated and complex and maybe ambivalent kinds of emotions. You're able to elicit those through your music. And this song employs those extended chords a great deal. So the first chord is an F major 7th chord. That's the 4 chord here in the key. And then I simply lowered the top 2 notes here to create this is a D minor 6th chord, but it's in an inversion that's a very tight inversion, and it's very close to this F major 7th. So in an ordinary inversion from the root up, first position, this would be a D minor 6th chord. But one of the rules that you want to try to keep in mind when you're creating chord progressions is that it often sounds jarring to sort of leap large distances. See how that does sound kind of jarring, because first of all, we're kind of covering too big of a range here, and it's disjointed. And so to the extent that you can move individual notes just a step, a half step or a whole step, or maybe just a little bit further than that, and keep the voicings tight and close, things are going to sound smoother. And that's what we do here. So F major 7 to D minor 6th, over F. It says over F because, again, it's inverted. But there's your D minor 6 with the D in the bottom. And then the next progression is the same fret, sort of not fretting. I'm a guitar player initially, so not fretting. I mean fingering here on the keyboard. It's the same fingering, but moved down. So see what I do here. And then I repeat that by moving the chords down just a little. And what that is an E minor 7 to A minor 7. So I'm repeating these same shapes, moving down. And so far, like I said, those are all diatonic chords. We got the F major 7th, that's the 4th. The D is the 2. The E is the 3. And the A is going to be the, that's the 6th. So that's the relative minor to C major. That's the whole, well, it's not quite the whole intro. So the first time it goes through, and then we repeat the first 2 chords, but end on this chord. That's an inversion of a C major 7th chord. Now this shape here, with a note here, and then we've got 4 half steps, and then a note, another half step up, and another 4 half steps. This shape is a shape that I actually use a lot throughout this song, because the 2nd chord has that shape, and the 4th chord in the progression has that same shape, and then this. Okay, so that's the intro. F major 7, D minor 6 inversion, E minor 7, A minor 7, F major 7, E minor 6 inversion to C major 7. However, what I kind of do with the intro is a bit of a misdirection, because those same chords from the right hand are going to continue on in the verse, but I'm going to change it up by adding different root notes. And this is what happens in the verse. It goes from to this. Okay, so what happened there? So this F major 7, if I am to add a D on the bottom, becomes a D minor 9th chord. Now why is that? It's simply because these 4 notes, if all you have to relate it to is an F as the bottom note, that is how you construct an F major 7th chord. If I add this D on the bottom, these notes, their position relative to the root differs. Okay, so this is a D minor 7th chord. If I just kept the regular old F triad and put a D minor under, or a D under it, we got a D minor 7. But if I have the whole F major 7 chord with 4 notes with a D underneath it, it becomes a D minor 9th chord. And then I walk up. This is a G dominant 9th chord, as opposed to what it is without a G in the root. That's D minor 6 inversion. But add that G, it becomes a G minor 9th chord. I'm sorry, G dominant 9th chord. Okay, walk down the bass. Now these chords are the same as they were in the intro. I've not changed the root, so I haven't changed the nature of the chord. E minor 7, A minor 7. Second time through, first 2 chords are the same, and then we walk up chromatically to this great A minor 9th voicing. This again is one of my favorite chord voicings. It's this shape that I showed you earlier, which is repeated in several different places in the song. But right here, this right hand shape doesn't have the root in it. Like you can see, it's a C major 7th chord inverted in this way. With the A added at the bottom, that new root, it becomes an A minor 9th voicing, a really smooth one too. Okay, so let's just pause here for a second and back up. So what I've done is I've taken the same exact chord progression from the intro, where in the intro, with just the right hand playing, what it represented and what it sounded like was a certain set of chords. And then by adding a couple of different root notes in the chorus or in the verse to that same chord progression, I've changed the relationships and created essentially a new set of chords. So let me play the intro and the verse, and you can keep an eye on my right hand. You'll see that I'm repeating the same thing in the verse from the intro, but that with these bass notes, I've created new chords and a new feeling. Here we go. All right, so that is one little trick for you to kind of consider. And I introduced this concept a bit in the Retro Chords overview video, but think about taking a chord that you play, whatever, voicing it is, whatever inversion it is, in the right hand, and then adding a note underneath. And with MIDI Chord Analyzer, you can see what kind of new chord are you creating. A very simple one in the key of C major. Here's a C major triad. But the C major triad shares two notes in common with the A minor triad. So if I keep the whole C major triad and add the A, you've got an A minor 7th chord. Another example might be this F major. That's the 4 chord. It shares two notes in common with the D minor chord, the 2 chord. So if I keep the whole F major triad and add that D, now I have a D minor 7 chord. It's just something to experiment with when you're thinking about trying to spice up a chord progression. Perhaps you don't need to even substitute or replace chords that you've already written. If you've written a nice 3-4 chord progression, try out playing that same progression, but adding different root notes on the bottom and see what happens. I might play a regular old vanilla progression like 1-4-5. 1-4-5-1, C, F, G, C. But what if I add notes on the bottom like this? It has a completely different feeling, right? While maintaining some of the same internal structure of those chords. Okay, so now I've introduced you to the intro and the verse progression and how they diverge, but then let's go into the pre-chorus section. Now, again, a concept that I like to come back to over and over again because I think it's super important is that when you're writing songs or producing music in general, you really want to keep a balance between repetition and novelty, so things that you've already introduced that the listener is becoming familiar with throughout the course of the song that they can groove to because they're like, oh yeah, I remember this part. And something new, that's the novel part, to keep on piquing their interest from moment to moment in the song. Oh, here's something I haven't heard yet. So you want to keep that balance. And you also want to have a balance between consonant things and contrasting things. Elements that, again, inspire a feeling of like, oh yeah, this goes along with what I've heard already. This goes along with what I was expecting, maybe. And on the other hand, this contrasts with what I've already heard and what I was expecting. This is something new and totally different. So because in the intro and the verse, I had a really sort of staccato, funky kind of progression, I wanted to contrast it in the pre-chorus by doing something more legato and sustained. So it goes like this. Okay, so that is the pre-chorus. Not only is it a contrast in terms of the staccato and legato, it's also a contrast in terms of these chords are thicker, they're more going on. They also reach up higher on the keyboard. They reach up higher on the scale, and so you've sort of created a contrast or a movement from low to high, which is always a good direction to head as you build throughout the course of a song from verse, pre-chorus to chorus. But anyway, this has a nice smooth sort of legato feeling so that because the intro is and the verse are funky and the chorus is pretty funky, I wanted to break that up so it wasn't fully repetitive. So let's look at these chords. So the first chord is a really stacked up first inversion F major 9 chord. Still diatonic, still in the key, but in the pre-chorus we start to reach out of the key a little bit, and I want to talk about that in detail. Okay, so here we have our first non-diatonic chord, the first chord in the song that is not properly in the key of C major. We've got an E major, kind of resolving to an E dominant 7th chord. This note here, this G sharp, is non-diatonic. It's not in the key of the song as we have it established so far. It's not in the key of C major. Okay, so why does this make sense then? Well, I think the simplest answer is how it relates to this chord that follows it, this A minor 9th, which is diatonic. Now, a little sidebar here. I am not the world's most accomplished guy when it comes to music theory. It's something that I definitely have been exposed to time and time again throughout my music career, and that has lasted about 25 years now, actually. But I never dug into it in depth in the way that many people have, and that maybe I could have. So the way that I explain why I think this makes sense may differ from how someone else more versed would explain it. But having said that, any 2 or 3 people, musicians, even really well-versed musicians in music theory, may explain the relationship between a chord and the next chord or the previous chord in a different way. But I think the easiest way to understand this movement is to think of the E major and the E dominant 7th chord as what's called a secondary dominant. So this is a concept which comes up time and time again in jazz theory and just music theory in general. But the easiest way to explain it is in the key of C major, here's 1, the tonic, C major, right? The 5 chord, if you add the 7th to it, is a G dominant 7th. And the relationship between the dominant 7th and the tonic is a very strong one. That is to say that this dominant 7th chord, when you hear it in the key of C major, it feels like it wants to resolve to the tonic. 5, 1. You're going to hear that over and over again in music, and it's just because it's very natural, it's very consonant. Now, a secondary dominant takes that type of relationship, but it applies it to basically any other chord in the key, not just returning to the 1 chord of the key, but in this case, okay, so where we're headed to is the 6th chord, the A minor chord, which is the relative minor to C major, and its secondary dominant, or its dominant, would be this E dominant 7th chord. See how it has that same kind of satisfying cadence? And so I think that's the best explanation as to why this chord can appear in this song, which so far has been established as in the key of C major, and have it make sense. So let's just play that half of the pre-chorus again. It sounds good, right? It sounds fairly natural. Now, where do I go from there? Okay, so we have another non-diatonic chord, in this case, D major. The chord built on D in the key of C major would be a D minor chord. So we have this note here, which is not diatonic either. Well, why does that work? I think for 2 reasons. First, if you follow along with me from the beginning, you're going to see that I'm repeating a sort of movement here. Okay, it's this thing. In the first instance, it's built on this E. E to E dominant 7th, and in the second, it's built here. D add 9 to D. another way that you could probably justify the inclusion of this two chord, this major 2 chord, is as a secondary dominant to the dominant in the key. Or in other words, the relationship between this and this and this. So we go from, if we already have agreed that the G dominant 7th is the dominant to the tonic, well, what would be a dominant to this? The D. So we're basically doing this kind of a movement, which sounds pretty natural, right? Even though it entails this D chord. And as I was thinking this through, it occurred to me that there's actually a really famous example of this exact progression in a song that everybody should be familiar with, and it goes way beyond retro for me. You know, I like to create retro 80s and 90s and like this late 70s music, but this goes back even further. So the Stones, the Rolling Stones, You Can't Always Get What You Want, uses this. So in the key of C, it would be something like, you can't always get what you want. You can't always get what you want. But if you try sometimes, you just might find you get what you need. So this chord, this D major, is serving kind of the same function in that turnaround as it does in this song. Listen to this progression and see if you can pick it out. And then back to the tonic, and that's going to take us into the chorus, which does the downbeat of the chorus is the tonic, the C major chord. However, I do a couple little things there that spice it up even further. So we go from the D add 9 to the D major, and then I do take it to the D minor, returning to the diatonic notes, and then I walk this up. Now, what I've done here is I've taken the right hand voicing, which was already present here in this D minor 7th chord, and I've walked up the root note. And now I have a lot of tension in this, which wants to resolve to the G chord, which is exactly what it does, because I've kept essentially an F major triad here, along with this D note on top, which is part of the G chord I'm going to. And so all three of these notes really want to pull to these two notes. Nice resolution to C. All right, and another thing that I do there to end off that chord progression, which is something I mentioned in previous videos as well, is that if you have had a series of chords, a chord progression that really did use a lot of complexity and a lot of lush additions and chord extensions, you may want to, at some point, give the listener a break and return to a nice old regular vanilla triad like this. And that's what I do at the very end of the pre-chorus to give a bit of relief. So one more time, this is the entire pre-chorus. F major 9, E to E dominant 7, A minor 9. This is that same voicing which appears in the end of the verse to the D add 9, D major, D minor 7, keeping that D minor 7 in the right hand, but over the G to resolve to the G, and then we're going to go to C in the chorus. All right, so that is the first three progressions, the first three sections. We've got the intro, verse, pre-chorus. Before we get to the chorus, let's run the whole thing down again. Intro. Verse. Then to the pre-chorus. All right, that has such a strong cadence that wants to return to the tonic that there's almost nowhere else you can go. And this is an opportunity for me to talk about sort of a songwriting thing, not necessarily a chords thing per se, but I often like to write the verse and everything preceding the chorus. If I'm going to write a song where the chorus is in a major key, for example, like in this case, C major, I kind of like to precede that with chords that give it more of a feeling like as if it was in the relative minor. So in this case would be A minor. A minor and C major are relative to each other. They're the same key. They have the same notes, essentially. And so we haven't had a chord progression yet where the C major, the tonic one chord, was this jumping off point, even though the song is ostensibly, evidently in the key of C major from the beginning. So what we're doing is we're hitting the chorus, the most important section of the song. On the downbeat of that, we're giving it what people have been expecting, basically the one chord of the key. Okay, so what is the chorus progression? It goes like this. Sorry about a couple mistakes in there. I actually am having trouble seeing past my mic to the keys, but we make do with what we have. Okay, so let's look at that in detail. So it starts with the C chord. This is a technique or a little trick that I mentioned in the Retro Chords intro video as well. But I like to sometimes, when I have a triad like this in the right hand and first inversion, if you drop these two notes and go back and forth, it has a nice little cadence interior to the chord that can sound super nice. And what we're actually doing is moving from C major to G add 11 over C. But it's a shape and a movement I use in a lot of my songs, and no exception here. And then I move the same right hand shape up to the D minor chord, but I move the bass down. So. Same kind of thing here, but what I'm creating here is a D minor 6. Again, back in the intro and the verse, we had a D minor 6. This is a different voicing. That's a lot of tension, and that wants to resolve. So where do I go from there? To that E7 again, which was in the pre-chorus. Because it's going to go to the A minor. Even though I'm not playing the full A minor 7th here, I'm just kind of vamping on these two notes. But that's where it's going, and so again we have that secondary dominant thing going on from the E dominant 7th to the A. And then we go to the... What we're doing here is we're going 4, 5, 1. But when I keep this C, inverted C triad in the right hand over the F chord, it creates a kind of suspended chord. And then we resolve to the G to the C. Okay. And then it repeats. The only difference in the second half of the chorus is how it ends. And instead of it going to A, proper A minor 7th chord basically, I do this. So this is a C suspended chord over F. And you can tell it has that suspended feeling. It needs to resolve. There we finally get the resolution. So this two-note thing here that I'm vamping on, is altered by the roots that it's over, and that is different in the first half and the second half of the chorus. Verses. All right, and then we are back to and that's the whole thing. So let me play you again the 4 chord progressions from beginning to end, and then I'll return with just some final points, I guess. Okay, we start in the intro. Just right hand. All diatonic. Add new roots in the verse. Walk it up to the pre-chorus. Real thick voicings. More legato. To the minor. There's the tension to the resolution. All right, so there you have it. So that is just a breakdown of an example chord progression from a song, a retrowave tune that I'm writing. In this case, it happens to be a late 70s soul kind of a jam, but definitely one that draws heavily on the kinds of jazz chords that I explained in the previous Retro Chords introduction video. We saw how 7th chords, 9th chords, 6th chords came into play throughout. We saw how different inversions, especially over different roots, can create slash chords or variations on a chord that still work with whatever melody you're using and create a sort of easy kind of substitution. We saw how it's important for the continuity of the song and to not jar the listener, to not try to jump from one voicing way up to another one, but to stay within the same kind of range and do tight voice leading for the sake of creating a smooth transition. And we talked a little bit about how you might start to introduce non-diatonic notes and chords, those that do not belong in the key naturally, but that still are justifiable in some way because they provide some kind of resolution, like this E dominant 7 to this A minor functioning as a secondary dominant. All right, so that was a Retro Chords breakdown for you. I hope you found it somewhat useful. Please let me know by leaving me a comment if this was helpful and or if there's something you'd like me to talk about more or differently. If this is something that you found beneficial, I'd be more than happy to do a similar thing, breaking down the chord progressions from other songs I've written and looking at what kind of lessons we can learn about music theory and how it applies, especially to making retro music. If there's anything else you'd like me to cover, please do leave me a comment. Otherwise, thank you so much for taking the time to watch this. And if you would like to see more about retrowave music production, please feel free to subscribe. I do videos about retro music theory, about producing, songwriting, and also share my own retrowave tunes here at the Ghost Models YouTube channel. So please feel free to subscribe. Thanks a lot for watching, and look forward to seeing you on the next one. Take it easy, guys.